Special Envoy Hans Grunberg briefs the Security Council on Yemen today's evening. Houthis escalate an attack with drones for second time in weeks. Years of conflict continue to claim lives of Yemeni children across the country. Welcome to Yemen Today TV. This is the English news with me, Injil Zazi. UN Special Envoy for Yemen Hans Grunberg will brief the Security Council on the situation in Yemen today's evening. During the past 2 months, Grunberg has been engaging with all parties in Yemen to reach a new truce. Yemen's permanent representative to the United Nations met with the UN Special Envoy in New York. During the meeting, the representative stressed the need to put pressure on the Houthi militia to stop its terrorist attacks on economic facilities. He pointed out that the Yemeni government continues to adhere to the peace option and to exercise self-restraint. A Houthi drone targeted the port of Al Dabba in Hadramaut. According to sources, the attack coincided with the arrival of an oil tanker to load 2 million barrels of crude oil. This is the second time the rebels attacked this port during this month. This report has more on this.
The terrorist Houthi militia targeted for the second time with Iranian drones at Dabba oil port in Hadramaut while a commercial oil ship was mooring. The Yemeni government said the continued targeting of civilian objects and national economic facilities by the terrorist Houthi militia represents a dangerous escalation that would exacerbate the humanitarian situation and threaten energy supplies, freedom and safety of navigation and international trade. In a statement, the government affirmed that these repeated criminal attacks on civilian facilities and objects represent a flagrant violation of all international laws and norms, and a blatant disregard for the disastrous humanitarian, environmental and economic repercussions resulting from them. Since the end of the humanitarian truce in Yemen in early October, the Houthi group has resumed its military escalation against economic and vital targets. Within a month, Houthi attacks hit the ports of Al-Nashima, Al-Dabba and Qana on the Arabian Sea, amid fears of dire repercussions of these attacks on the economic and humanitarian situation and the standstill efforts to revive the peace process. The Houthi group vowed to directly target oil tankers arriving at Yemeni ports in the coming times. The head of the Houthi self-proclaimed government confirmed that if the oil companies didn't reach an agreement with his government regarding the transfer of oil and gas revenues to Sana'a, they will deal only with iron and fire. He added that the militia in the coming times will not warn the ships, but rather will strike them directly. He claimed that the Houthi rebels will not let people starve while they will tamper with Yemeni wealth, and that the government renewed its call on the international community to move from condemning these terrorist attacks that threaten the stability of Yemen and the region to a collective action to deter and confront them by classifying the militia as an international terrorist organization. Houthis day by day prove to the whole world their disregard for peace in Yemen and their adherence to an Iranian and Imamite agenda that will only suffocate the Yemeni people.
The U.S. Ambassador Stephen Fagan condemned the recent Houthi attack on key oil ports in the country. The U.S. Ambassador expressed regret over the Houthis' refusal to renew the truce, which has contributed during the past 6 months to the relief of Yemenis. The U.S. diplomat also renewed the call for the release of 12 U.S. embassy staff in Sana'a, who were detained by the Houthis. Media outlets reported that the Yemeni government stopped exporting 2 million barrels of Yemeni crude oil. The step comes after the recent attack by the Houthi militia on Al Dabba port in Hadramaut. The Ministry of Oil denounced the Houthi terrorist attack on Al Dabba port in Hadramaut. The ministry affirmed that these terrorist operations will not discourage it from continuing to work to alleviate people's suffering and to confront Houthi threats and Iran's drones. The Yemeni government has warned all citizens abroad against dealing with the terrorist Houthi militia. The Yemeni Ministry of Interior said that all entities who provide support and assistance to the Houthis will be subject to legal accountability. This comes in line with the National Defense Council's decision to classify the Houthi militia as a terrorist organization. A child was seriously injured as a result of a mine explosion in Hodeidah. Days ago, 11 civilians, including women and children, were injured as a result of a Houthi mine explosion in a civilian vehicle in the same governorate. In Taiz, a child has reported to be wounded by the Houthi militia's shelling on the outskirts of the city. Casualties among children are in constant rise. According to the latest report released by Save the Children organization, the organization said that nearly 92 children have died between January and mid-November this year. The following report has more details.
The number of children that continue to be killed because of the ongoing war remains horrendous, despite the on and off talking and negotiations between the Houthis and the different other parties, including the ousted Sana'a government. It's being reported that 92 children have been killed in Yemen between January 1st and November 15th, according to Save the Children. Children in Yemen demand new truce, as one child is killed or injured every day in 2022. There was a truce from April till October, but now the death and injury of children seem to be on daily basis. The Save the Children NGO pointed out that during that accounting period, one child was injured on average per day, adding this is related to the war conditions in the country. Despite the positive gains made for children during the nationwide truce, more than 330 Yemeni children have been killed or injured in the war so far this year. No one in Yemen has survived the past 7 years unmarked. Not a single person in the country has not suffered a loss. Children have seen their friends, parents, and teachers killed. They have witnessed the repeated attacks on their schools and have seen the hospitals that they rely on to recover damaged and crippled beyond what the health sector can cope with. Ultimately, these unforgiving years have left children afraid, traumatized, and in urgent need of humanitarian intervention.
Military forces shot down a drone in Abiyan, southern Yemen. A security source said that a drone is likely to belong to the Houthi militia, and it flew for several minutes over separate locations where units of government forces were stationed before it was shot down by ground defenses. Yemen has dealt with tough food crisis since the outbreak of the conflict. While world aid agencies try to help, little has been done to address such a crisis. The private sector can contribute to contain food crisis. This report has more.
The conflict in Yemen that erupted in early 2015 has led to an ongoing unprecedented humanitarian emergency. The needs of the Yemeni people regarding food far exceeded current consumption levels, with 3.5 million pregnant or breastfeeding women and children under 5 suffering from acute malnutrition, and up to 19 million people affected by food insecurity in 2022. Since the start of the Russia-Ukraine war, the global supplies of grain and other key agricultural products has disrupted and also led to the increase in food prices. Yemen is a country that highly depends on grain imports to meet the needs of the people, which are already suffering from famine. The conflict and the situation in Yemen have put extraordinary stresses on the private sector in Yemen. The country receives food imports from a number of private sector companies and humanitarian agencies. The humanitarian organizations have imported about 0.9 million tons, mostly wheat, in 2020 and have stayed high because of the growing food crisis. The World Food Programme, which is the largest food importer among the humanitarian agencies, aims to support nearly 13 million of the most vulnerable people, almost half of the population, with emergency food assistance in 2022. WFP distributed approximately 26% of Yemen's total wheat imports in 2020. However, even the enormous scale of food disruption leaves the large majority of Yemen wheat imports supplied by the private sector. Yemen's current level of hunger is extremely dangerous, causing great suffering for millions of people. The number of people facing food insecurity is expected to reach 19 million by December 2022. Unfortunately, the help provided still does not reach everyone in Yemen, leaving many people on the verge of starvation.
Coming next in the news. United Nations announces new fund to support countries hit by climate change.
ننزل ندي ماء من الغل والغلة بعيد، كنا ندي بالدواب نعبي ماء ورجعنا. ننزل الساعة 5 رجعنا الساعة 9.
ما يقلنا ظهر لأنه زحمة ما حد يخلي الجهل يغرف وإحنا تعبنا زيادة.
وكنت أحس صدري يوجعني وعز قلبك ركبي يوجعيني.
كنا ما نستخدم حتى نغسل أولادنا إلا يعني بأيام معدودة.
كنت أغيب على المدرسة لأن كنت أروح الديمة.
حتى وإن كان يجي الأمطار تروح هدر لأنه ما في معي خزانة.
الوقت نشتري ب30,000 هي مع هستيلك ما يغلقش معها الشهر.
بس راح تطلب الله ولا أي حاجة، عامله كل شغلك الماء.
Welcome back. Climate change has affected many nations. During the past COP27 conference in Egypt, it was agreed to create a fund to help vulnerable countries who have been hit by climate change. This report gives more details.
In conflict-ravaged nations like Yemen, Somalia, and Nigeria, devastating floods and droughts kill hundreds of people and displace tens of thousands from their homes. These countries and many other countries in the Middle East and Africa have been rushed into chaos and wars for several years. Now, climate change is an added disaster for those already struggling for survival. The United Nations Climate Conference, which wrapped up last weekend in Egypt, established a new fund to help poor vulnerable countries hit hard by climate change. Countries like Yemen are among the world's poorest and more vulnerable to climate change impacts, as they are less able to adapt to weather extremes, and they have little or no access to climate financing. Robert Mardini, the Director General of the International Committee of the Red Cross, said that close to zero amount of climate finance is reaching conflict-affected nations because decision makers who decide to allocate those funds consider that it's too risky to invest there. He warned that the worst is yet to come for Yemenis and Somalis amid worsening food shortages. Those decision makers need to reconsider the risk appetite because there are also big risks in not investing in these countries and huge human cost that should be avoided. In Yemen, a third of population are not able to find sufficient food in 2022. Those include living in famine-like conditions, according to the United Nations Food Agency. Children under 5 years acutely malnourished and pregnant and breastfeeding women are the most affected, said the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. Yemen has endured a brutal civil war for many years so far. The conflict devastated the country, created one of the world's worst humanitarian crises, and many people have been killed. The country has also suffered from droughts, oil erosion, and yet worsening floods every year. According to the United Nations Agriculture Agency, this year's rainfall was 45% higher compared to 2021. At least 72 people were killed in flooding this year, and some 74,000 families in 22 provinces were affected, with those living in displacement camps bearing the effect of the flood. There are 4.3 million people displaced, most made homeless by the raging conflict. Besides, the Russian war in Ukraine has also doubled the challenges and the cost of living for people, and to meet the increasing humanitarian needs, the World Food Programme says it needs more than $1 billion until March 2023. Conflict-hit countries are unlikely to receive funds because they lack stable governments and they don't have institutions in order to have climate finance, pointing to the skyrocketing prices of food, energy, fertilizers, and the straining supply chain.
The conflict has impacted all aspects of life in Yemen, and farmers are no exception. Farmers in Ma'rib are faced with many challenges, especially during the harvest season. The following report has more on this.
Ma'rib Governorate is characterized by a fertile agricultural environment that produces many crops of high quality. These crops covered the commercial markets in Ma'rib for years and the neighboring governorates before export routes were closed due to the war. Now, farmers face many risks as the lands end up getting spoiled or they are put in a situation where they sell the products for a low price. This happens due to the geographical nature, its clay soil, and the availability of water in an abundant and effortless manner from the Ma'rib Dam.
There is ill-managed marketing in this governorate and other governorates like Sana'a. People can't travel as they can't walk in these roads, so the farmers cannot do anything and they can't sell their products.
Despite the difficulty in obtaining seeds and fertilizers, and the high costs in addition to the farm works, Saleh is a young farmer who was able to engage in the cultivation of onions and potatoes as a crop that enhances the local market at reasonable prices, which citizens consume about 60% on a daily basis.
The market is really weak and the import of onions is also really low. There is a problem with growing tomatoes and potatoes and it isn't sufficient for people. The farmer sells the product for half of the price.
Neglecting the most important agricultural sector to the local trade markets in Ma'rib negatively affects the lives of citizens as well as farmers, forcing many of them to refrain from cultivating the most important agricultural crops.
In Taiz, 1,000 cases of dengue fever have been recorded. This comes when public hospitals lack basic medical services. This has doubled people's suffering, especially those who cannot afford to pay for medication. This report has more details.
The dengue fever epidemic has spread in Taiz governorate in an unprecedented manner during the recent period, infecting more than 10,000 people, including 13 deaths in the governorate since the beginning of this year. The fever is endemic to the city of Taiz, and it has become difficult to control it due to the water crisis that the city has been suffering from for years. In addition to the large spread of mosquitoes as a result of open sewage, the accumulation of waste, and the failure to maintain public and personal hygiene. The open waste and sewage water constitute the incubating environment for mosquitoes, as is the case in the city of Taiz, with the density of garbage and the lack of general hygiene in institutions and restaurants, as well as the weak oversight over public health facilities. Dengue fever is transmitted by mosquitoes, as it sucks the blood of an infected person, and after the incubation period, which lasts 8 to 10 days, mosquitoes are able, by biting people and sucking their blood, to transmit the virus throughout their lives. Citizens in Taiz suffer from the spread of fevers in light of their inability to confront it, due to the lack of capabilities to obtain medical services or purchase the necessary medicines amid apparent inability of the government in combating the dangerous epidemic that ravages the people of Taiz.
Here is a reminder of the main headlines. Special Envoy Hans Grunberg briefs the Security Council on Yemen today's evening. Houthis escalate an attack with drones for second time in weeks. Years of conflict continue to claim lives of Yemeni children across the country. This is the end of the news. It was Injil Zazi. Thank you for watching.